Jack the Giant Killer. Part 1. In the reign of King Arthur there lived in the county of Cornwall a worthy farmer, who had an only son, named Jack. Jack was strong and brave and very daring, and was never backward when danger was in the way. Now, in those days there lived a huge giant in a gloomy cavern on St. Michael's Mount, which rises out of the sea near the shores of Cornwall. The Cornish people had suffered greatly from his thefts and pillaging, for he used to wade through the sea to the mainland, and carry off 6 or more of their oxen at a time. At last Jack made up his mind to destroy this monster. He took a horn, a shovel, a pickaxe, and a dark lantern, and one winter's evening swam over the sea to the mount. Then he set to work, and before morning had dug a great pit. He covered it carefully over with sticks and straw, and strewed some earth on the top to make it look like solid ground. And then he blew his horn so loudly that the giant awoke, and came out roaring like thunder. "You impudent villain! You shall pay dearly for disturbing my rest. I will broil you for my breakfast." But almost as he spoke, he tumbled headlong into the pit. "Oh ho, Mr. Giant," said Jack. "How is your appetite now? Will nothing serve you for breakfast but broiling poor Jack?" Then he struck the giant such a blow on the head with a pickaxe that he killed him. When the justices of Cornwall heard of this valiant deed, they sent for Jack, and declared that he should always be called Jack the Giant Killer, and they gave him a sword, and a belt upon which was written, in letters of gold, "This is the valiant Cornishman, who slew the giant Cormoran." There was another giant in England called Blunderbore, who vowed to take revenge on Jack for this exploit. One day, as Jack was passing through a wood on a journey to Wales, he fell asleep by the side of a fountain. The giant, coming along, found him there, and seeing by the writing on the belt who Jack was, he lifted him on his shoulder, and carried him off to his castle. When Jack awoke and found himself in the clutches of Blunderbore, he was terribly frightened. The giant carried him into a room and locked him up, while he went to fetch another giant who lived close by to help him eat Jack for dinner. While he was gone, Jack heard dreadful shrieks and groans from different parts of the castle, and soon after he heard a mournful voice saying, "Haste, valiant stranger, haste away, lest you become the giant's prey. On his return he'll bring another, still more savage than his brother. A horrid, cruel monster who, before he kills, will torture you." Poor Jack looked out of the window, which was just over the gate of the castle, and saw 2 giants coming along arm in arm. "Now," thought he, "death or freedom is at hand." There happened to be 2 strong cords in the room, and Jack made a large noose with a slip knot in each of them. Then, just as the giants were coming through the gate, he threw the ropes over their heads, and fastening the other ends to a beam in the ceiling, he pulled the ropes with all his might until he had nearly strangled the giants. Then he drew his sword and slipped down the ropes and killed them both. Next Jack took the keys from giant Blunderbore and searched through the castle. In one of the rooms he found 3 ladies who told him that their husbands had been killed by the giant, who had afterwards condemned them to be starved to death. Jack gave them the castle and all the riches it contained to make some amends for the dreadful pains they had suffered, and then went on his way. After traveling some days, he lost himself in a lonely valley, but when he had wandered about some while, he at length succeeded in finding a large house. He went up to it and knocked loudly at the gate, when, to his great horror, a monstrous giant with 2 heads came forth. He spoke very civilly, however, and took Jack into the house, leading him to a room where there was a good bed, in which he could pass the night. Jack took off his clothes, but, though he was very tired, he could not go to sleep. Presently he heard the giant walking about in the bedchamber, which was the next room, saying to himself, though here you lodge with me this night, you shall not see the morning light. My club shall dash your brains out quite." When he heard this, Jack got out of bed, and taking a large, thick piece of wood, he laid it in his own place in the bed, and hid himself in a dark corner of the room. In the middle of the night, the giant came with his great club, and struck several heavy blows upon the bed. Then he went off, thinking he had broken all Jack's bones. Early next morning Jack walked into the giant's room and thanked him for the night's lodging. The giant was terribly startled to see him, and stammered out, "Oh, dear me! Is it you? Pray, how did you sleep last night? Did you hear or see anything to disturb you?" "Nothing worth speaking of, thank you," answered Jack carelessly. "A rat, I believe, gave me 3 or 4 slaps with his tail, but that was all." The giant said nothing, but went and fetched 2 bowls of hasty pudding for their breakfast. Jack did not wish the giant to think that he could not eat as much as himself, so he contrived to fasten a leather bag inside his coat. He then managed to slip the pudding into this bag, while pretending to eat it. When breakfast was done, he said to the giant, "Now I will show you a fine trick. I can cure all wounds with a touch. You shall see an example." He then took a knife, ripped up the leather bag, and all the hasty pudding tumbled out upon the floor. "Oh dear, splutter her nails!" cried the giant, who was ashamed to be outdone by such a little fellow. "Her can do that herself!" And snatching up the knife, he plunged it into his stomach and fell down dead. After this, Jack went farther on his journey. In a few days he met King Arthur's only son, who was traveling into Wales to deliver a beautiful lady from the power of a wicked magician. Jack attached himself to the prince, and they traveled on together. The prince was very generous, and soon gave away all the money he possessed. After having parted with his last penny to an old beggar woman, he was very uneasy as to where they were to pass the night. "Sir," said Jack, 2 miles farther on there lives a giant with 3 heads, who can fight 500 men at once and make them fly. I will go on and visit him. Do you wait here until I return." Jack rode on to the gates of the castle, and gave a loud knock. The giant, with a voice like thunder, roared out, "Who is there?" "No one but your poor cousin Jack." "Well, what news, cousin Jack?" "Dear uncle, I have bad news for you. Here is the king's son coming with 2,000 men to kill you." "Cousin Jack, this is bad news indeed. But I have a large cellar underground, where I shall hide myself, and you shall lock, bolt and bar me in until the king's son is gone." So Jack locked, bolted and barred the giant in the cellar, and then went back and fetched the prince, and they feasted and made merry, and spent the night very comfortably in the castle. In the morning Jack gave the prince gold and silver from the giant's treasury. Then the prince set forth on his journey, while Jack let the giant out of the cellar. The giant thanked Jack very much for saving him, and asked what he should give him as a reward. "Why, good uncle," said Jack, "I desire nothing but the coat and cap, with the rusty sword and the slippers which are hanging beside the bed." "Take them," said the giant, "and keep them for my sake. They will be very useful to you. The coat will make you invisible. The cap will give you knowledge, the sword will cut through anything, no matter what it may be, and the shoes are of vast swiftness." Jack took the gifts, thanked the giant, and then quickly caught up with the prince. After a few days' further journey they reached the dwelling of the beautiful lady whom the prince had come to rescue. She received the prince very graciously, and made a feast for him. When it was ended she rose, and taking her handkerchief said, "My lord, tomorrow morning I command you to tell me on whom I have bestowed this handkerchief, or else lose your head."